I want to begin again with my gratitude for your taking the time. Both of you are extraordinarily busy. I feel like I'm stepping into the Museum of American Jewish Life. This is like really an incredible place to be. And what I want to focus on in our conversation is the notion of professional divergence, when a child chooses to chart their own path. And when we were talking before, I mentioned a word that you said, don't mention that word again. And I'm going to mention it again right at the outset. There are people, and we mentioned there's a great article by Adam Ferziger, who use the word dynasty to describe what you've built through KJ, through Ramaz, and you push back, say, I don't want to use the word dynasty. So I guess I wanted to begin by asking you, why don't you like the word dynasty? And then maybe we could talk a little bit about the first time that you realized that there were any expectations, maybe not dynastic expectations, but any expectations that you were going to go on a certain path to begin with.
You have a couple of hours to discuss this. First of all, the word dynasty is very presumptuous, and I don't like presumptuous things. My great-grandfather, the Ramaz, Rav Moshe Zavulun Margolis, came to our congregation, Kehilath Jeshurun, KJ, in 1906, and served there as the rabbi, the senior rabbi, until 1936, when he passed away. My father came as his English-speaking assistant, Rabbi Joshua Lookstein, before he was actually even a rabbi. He didn't have smicha yet from YU. And he came as the English-speaking assistant. And in 1936, after my great-grandfather... Well, first of all, my father married the boss's granddaughter. Rabbi Margolis' daughter's daughter, my mother, Gertrude S. Lookstein. And in 1936, after my great-grandfather's passing on Zion Elul, my father became the rabbi of the congregation. And in 1958, when I received smicha from Yeshiva University, Rab Soloveitchik and Rab Dr. Belkin, Aleichem HaShalom, there were very few positions available. And so I came as my father's assistant.
I'm just to pause, I'm just curious, would you have considered other pulpits at that point?
Yes, I would have considered other pulpits. There were two possibilities. One was in Detroit, and I wasn't going to Detroit because I was 26 years old and not married, and I thought there were no Jewish girls in Detroit. Interestingly, my son is married to a Jewish girl from Detroit, okay. Georgie. Thank God for her. But I wasn't going to go to Detroit. The other possibility was what became the Sephardic Temple in Cedarhurst. It was going to be a new Sephardi congregation in a place where no Sephardim lived. They would all have to drive from Brooklyn or from Long Island. Now, I did not consider that it's my job to worry about how people get to shul. How they got to shul. But to go to a place when nobody lived and everybody had to drive, I wasn't so comfortable with that. And besides which, I was an Ashkenazi, and I didn't feel comfortable becoming a Sephardi.
So remarkable to think of it's in the five towns, to think of the five towns that way.
That's right.
It's quite a different place now. I grew up in the five towns.
In retrospect, I think how many smorgasbords I could have eaten in the Sephardic Temple over these years, I would probably be 3 times my size, at least in girth. So I came here, and it was an interesting challenge to come and be my father's assistant. My father was arguably the greatest modern Orthodox rabbi of his time. He was the teacher of everybody, And the model for so many outstanding rabbis, Rabbi Lamb, Rabbi Roth, Rabbi Klapperman, Rabbi Izzy Miller, these were all his students. And I'm coming in as his assistant. It probably awakened in me some of the doubts that I had subconsciously, I think, when I grew up. As I was growing up, I never expected to be a rabbi.
Really?
Never. I didn't know what I wanted to be. People thought I would be a lawyer because I had the gift of gab.
Sure.
And they thought, oh, well, he'll be a litigator or something like that. I never really thought of being a lawyer. And I actually went to Columbia College. And when I was in the end of my junior year, I suddenly realized that I was going to be graduated from Columbia College in another year and a quarter as an educated bum. I would be very well educated because I got a great education there, but I was equipped to do nothing. And that's when I sat down with my father and basically I said, what do you think I should do? He said, well, what do you want to do? And I was interested in Jewish education, being a teacher, perhaps going further and being an educator.
But your father didn't push you into this.
My father never pushed me into it. The one thing he did was when I spoke about becoming an educator, a Jewish educator, he said, well, if you want to be a Jewish educator, you have to become an educated Jew first. And the way to do that, he said, is not to go to teachers' college, where you'll just learn to be an educational plumber. Mm-hmm. You'll learn the how and why of education, but you're not going to learn the subject. You should go to yeshiva, get smicha, not go into the pulpit rabbinate, but become an educator. But you will be an educated Jew after you finish 4 or 5 years in yeshiva in Reitz. Mm-hmm. And at the time I didn't realize that I would have 4 of those years with Rav Soloveitchik, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, which is enough to educate anybody, including me.
But I'm curious if we could almost shift a little bit. You know, you said you had some doubts, and eventually you kind of built this storied career in KJ and in Ramaz. I want to shift and talk a little bit, beginning with you and then with Josh, about, you know, you said you have reservations with the term dynasty, which I understand. Did you expect or did you encourage Josh to join the rabbinate and to kind of come into this path, given that you already had 3 generations? You had, so to speak, what in the Talmud says, a chazaka. So let's keep this going. I would understand why a parent would want to see that.
To the best of my knowledge, no. You'll have to ask him. But to the best of my knowledge, I wanted him to grow up as a shomer mitzvos, as an observant Jew, as a knowledgeable Jew, as a learned Jew. If he would decide to go into the rabbinate, wonderful. But I don't remember ever pushing him into the rabbinate, just as I don't remember my father pushing me in any way into the rabbinate.
So you're exactly right. I think memory is always like a funny thing, and I know with myself, my father's a doctor, and I don't think he never put any pressure on me as a doctor, but you grow up with a certain value system of what does it mean to make a contribution. And that definitely shaped me, even if my father never sat me down and said, to make a contribution, you have to cure cancer. But I think everybody in my family, you have a certain bar of what it means to have a contribution that is dignified, a dignified contribution. So I guess I'm curious with you, Josh, your memory, whether it was spoken or unspoken, you eventually did begin your career as the assistant, following in your father's footsteps and in your grandfather's footsteps, as like the assistant to the generation previously. what drove you to even begin your path that way? If, again, let's grant some aspect of what your father's recollection is, there was never any explicit, like, this is what you have to do. So what pulled you in that direction?
So I would say I agree that I don't think there was anything explicit that my father had done. I do think there was the community that I was in that was explicit from them. I do remember sort of my whole life this sort of expectation, not only that I would behave a certain way as the rabbi's son or the principal's son, but that I would eventually become the rabbi of KJ.
Do you have an earliest memory of when you realized, I am a Lookstein? I'm not Josh. I am a Lookstein, which is, do you have early...
I don't. I don't have a specific memory of that. And I think part of it is because I feel like I spent my youth years running away from it. So to the extent that I had a memory of it, I don't have that memory anymore.
When you say run away from it, what do you literally, you're a little mischievous, a little rebellious?
Yeah, mischievous. I never did anything terrible. But I also just used to say, I remember, I sort of, this like a line that I have because I said it so many times, that becoming a rabbi was the last thing on earth I wanted to do. Ever.
Yet. You became a rabbi.
I became a rabbi.
So I'm just curious, during that process,
right?
Were you like, was there a voice whispering, like, what are you, like, turn the car around? Like, why are you going through with this?
No. And I'll tell you why no. Because I think until I was in it and my father's assistant rabbi, I assumed it would never happen. So I feel like the choices that I made sort of, each of them sort of, they happened. There was never a time I sat down and I said, okay, I am 18 years old. I am 20 years old. Here's my path to becoming the assistant rabbi at KJ and working at Ramaz. The first person who ever explicitly told me that I need to be a rabbi was Rav Bina in Hakotel.
Okay.
Where he basically sat me down in his kitchen and said, like I do in general, I'm going to tell you something that nobody else will tell you. Uh-huh. You have to be a rabbi.
Subtlety is not.
Yes, is not. That's not his. Yes. Even if he.
I paid him.
even if he weren't Israeli, he would not have that.
Yes.
He would not have that subtlety. I learned for 2 years in Israel. Had you told me before I went to Israel that I would say that for 2 years, I would have told you that you were crazy. And then I got to YU, and immediately I went to Hask for the summer, and I got all the NCSY people there were recruiting me to be in their region. I went into the upstate NCSY region, and then I went to Winnipeg on Counterpoint, and then I went to Australia on a Counterpoint, and I was just in this world, and I was loving it. I was loving the teaching, and I was loving the curative work, and at a certain point, it sort of was obvious if you wanted to become all of my mentors in this, Michael Unterberg, Jonathan Miskin, Stephen Finkelstein, a whole bunch of people. All the guys were getting smicha.
You're like, I can do this.
So okay, I guess if I want to teach, I'll get smicha, and I got smicha, and then I finished smicha and I got a job in Stamford, Connecticut for a year.
Oh, you didn't begin?
I didn't begin in KJ.
Okay.
No, I sort of got lucky. I had been a rabbi for the Yom Noraim in Agudath Shalom in Stamford.
Sure, beautiful.
And they needed a rabbi to tide them over between rabbis. So I went there for 4 months, and then they didn't succeed in finding a rabbi. So I was there for a year. That was my first pulpit, and then I took a year off.
I want to interrupt.
Yeah.
At the end of that year in Stamford, which he was right out of yeshiva.
Yeah.
He went
to be
straight
the senior
from
rabbi.
smicha to becoming the successor to Rabbi Ehrenkrantz, who was just retiring from Agudath Shalom.
There was someone in between.
Yeah.
But okay.
All I can say is we were invited for a kiddush at the end of that year in Stanford.
It was a Shabbos.
For Shabbos. Yes, Shabbos and Shul. And they did a toast and a roast of Joshua Lookstein. I have never seen such love for a young rabbi in my life.
But in the back of your head when you were there, was there a part of you saying, we're going to bring you up to the big leagues?
Well, we had already talked about him, and it was they took him on for only a year.
When was the first conversation, so to speak, that like it's time to come home?
I don't remember the conversation. What I remember is at a certain point towards the end of that year, I think,
Your first year
as a rabbi, I realized that if I had come this far, I was going to try it out in KJ and Ramaz. Like I wasn't gonna. It didn't make sense to get to be this close and then not to at least see if this was the right thing for me. So, but again, if you think about it, what I tell people is sort of becoming a rabbi was the last thing on earth I wanted to do, and then it sort of became the second to last thing on earth I wanted to do, and the third to last thing on earth I wanted to do, and it sort of climbed the ranks, but it sort of climbed the ranks from the back
Correct.
A little bit. And then I think the same thing sort of with KJ and Ramaz. It wasn't this, at that point, it wasn't this, oh my goodness, like this is what I want to do. It still was...
I guess I'm here already. I'm
yeah,
close by.
I got it.
I'm Stanford.
I have to try it.
And
it's
slow. There's like a slow drift that
Correct.
pulls you out. So I'm curious. When did you begin? Do you remember what time of the year was your first year in KJ?
In KJ, yeah, I started in the fall of 1998.
Before the Yom Ryan, before the high holidays.
Correct.
So I'm curious. When he began, what was the first time, if ever, that you noticed this is not going to be sustainable?